Zoom call came in at 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was still in my driveway, coffee in one hand, watching the notification light up my phone before I'd even started the engine. My new boss, she'd been in the role exactly 11 weeks, wanted a quick sync. That's what she called it. A quick sync. I should have known. I'd been with Meridian Logistics for 19 years, not 18, not 19 years, which somehow feels more specific, more real, like a number that didn't get rounded up for a press release. I started as a supply chain analyst when the company operated out of a converted warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, running routes for 3 regional grocery chains and a medical supply distributor. By the time that Zoom notification hit my screen, Meridian had contracts with 14 of the top 25 retailers in the country, 3 federal government distribution agreements, and a proprietary routing optimization platform that processed roughly $1.4 billion in freight annually. I had built that platform, not helped build it, not contributed to it, built it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name was Victoria. She was 31 years old, had an MBA from a school I will not name because it would sound petty, and she was the daughter of the man who had acquired Meridian in a private equity deal 8 months earlier. She had never worked in logistics a day in her life before her father put her in charge of operational transformation, which, as best I could tell, meant reorganizing things that weren't broken and eliminating people who remembered how things actually worked. I clicked join, and there she was, already on screen, already with that look, the look people get when they've rehearsed what they're about to say, so many times it's come out the other side of rehearsed, and into something colder. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I said. There was a woman from HR whose name I can't remember and honestly don't want to. She was there the way HR people are always there in these moments, present but somehow blurred, like someone left her layer on 50% opacity. Victoria told me the company was moving in a new direction. She said my role was being eliminated as part of her restructuring. She used the phrase redundant to current needs, which I had never heard before, and hope never to hear again. She said I would receive a severance package, 60 days, and that my access would be revoked at the end of the business day. 60 days. 19 years. The HR woman said something about COBRA and returning my equipment and a document I'd need to sign. I was nodding, but I wasn't really hearing it anymore. I was thinking about a conversation I'd had with my father almost 22 years ago, when I was still finishing my master's degree and he was recovering from his second surgery, sitting in that green recliner he refused to throw away. He'd worked as an industrial engineer for 34 years at a manufacturing firm in Dayton. Good company, decent people, treated him well right up until they didn't, which happened about 3 years before he was planning to retire. They found a way to restructure him out with a fraction of what he'd been promised. He never fully recovered from it. Not financially, not in terms of who he was when he walked into a room. He told me something that afternoon I never forgot. He said, "Whatever you build, make sure it's yours before you walk through their door." I thought about that a lot over the years, more than he probably knew. I said, "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." Victoria looked almost surprised, like she'd braced for something that didn't come. Then she smiled. Small, efficient, the smile of someone moving on to the next item on a list. I closed my laptop and sat in my driveway for a long time. Let me tell you what I had built. In 2009, Meridian was a solid regional operation, but they were hemorrhaging money on routing inefficiencies. The dispatch software they were using had been built in the mid-90s and hadn't been meaningfully updated since. I'd been there about 4 years at that point, and I'd started writing something on my own. Nights, weekends, using my own equipment. On my own time. A routing optimization engine that accounted for real-time variables, weather delays, fuel cost fluctuations, dock availability windows, carrier capacity, things the existing system treated as static, things that aren't static. I called it Meridian Pathfinder internally, but the actual software, the architecture, the core logic, I had filed for a provisional patent in March of 2009, before I brought it to anyone at the company, before I showed a single screen to a single colleague. The provisional was followed by a full utility patent application in September of that same year, and the patent was granted in 2011. Here's the part that matters. My employment agreement at Meridian had a standard IP assignment clause. Anything I developed, in the scope of employment, or using company resources, belonged to them. Standard language. Every tech-adjacent company has it. The problem for them, and I only understood this fully after sitting down with an IP attorney friend of mine several years later, almost by accident, over a conversation that started as dinner and ended as a 2-hour legal consultation, was that Pathfinder had been developed entirely outside those parameters. My own machine, my own internet connection, my own address. And critically, the provisional patent had been filed 5 months before I was promoted into the role where routing optimization was even tangentially part of my job description. My attorney friend, his name is Bernard, and I owe him more than I can calculate, explained it to me like this. The assignment clause in my contract covered work done within the scope of my employment. At the time I developed Pathfinder, my scope was demand forecasting for the Mid-Atlantic region. Routing architecture was not my job. It was something I did on my own, because I saw a problem and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The patent was mine. It had always been mine, and Meridian for 9 years in complete good faith on my part. Under an informal handshake arrangement that had been memorialized in a licensing addendum attached to my compensation agreement in 2013, had been operating under a license to use Pathfinder in exchange for certain compensation structures tied to my salary and retention. That license had a clause in it. Section 9, paragraph 4. It said, in plain language that I had read so many times I could recite it from memory. The license to use, operate, sublicense, or derive commercial value from the Pathfinder system would immediately terminate upon involuntary separation of the licensor from the company, unless both parties agreed in writing to a separate licensing arrangement at commercially reasonable terms within 30 days of said separation. I had not been asked about a separate licensing arrangement. I had not been given 30 days. I had been given 60 days of severance and a form about returning my laptop. I sat with this for about a week. I want to be honest about that week because I think people skip over it in stories like this, and the skipping makes the whole thing feel less true. It wasn't a week of scheming. It wasn't me rubbing my hands together in a dark room. It was a hard week. I'd given 19 years to that company. I had colleagues there I genuinely cared about, people who had nothing to do with what Victoria was doing. People who had families and mortgages and who came in every day and did their work without politics or agenda. I called my wife on that Tuesday afternoon and told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, then she asked if I was okay, and I said I didn't know yet, which was the truth. She said, "Come home." I came home. We sat at the kitchen table and I walked her through all of it, the call, the severance package, section 9, paragraph 4. She's a practical woman. She looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't want to blow anything up if I didn't have to, but I wanted them to know. She nodded. She said, "Then start with a letter." Bernard helped me draft it. It took us 3 days to get the language right, because the goal wasn't aggression. The goal was clarity. We wanted Meridian's legal team to understand, in precise and unmistakable terms, what they were dealing with. The letter outlined the patent, the licensing addendum, and Section 9. It asked, in the measured language lawyers use when they mean something serious, whether Meridian intended to enter into a commercial licensing arrangement, and if so, to please respond within 30 days as stipulated. We sent it to their general counsel on a Wednesday morning. By Friday afternoon, I had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. It was not the general counsel, it was Victoria. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was about 4 minutes long, and I've listened to it more times than I should admit. She started formal. "I'd like to connect with you regarding some matters related to the transition." And by the end of it, she was asking me, in a voice that had lost whatever composure she'd rehearsed, whether I would be open to a conversation. She used the word please 3 times in 90 seconds. I called Bernard instead. I said, "They got the letter." He said, "I know." What came next took about 5 months, and I won't pretend it was easy or clean because it wasn't. These things never are. There were depositions, counter-arguments, a period of about 6 weeks where Meridian's outside counsel tried to argue that the Pathfinder development had implicitly occurred within the scope of my employment even if it hadn't formally, which was an interesting theory that did not survive contact with the actual timeline. The provisional filing from March 2009 had a timestamp. My job description from 2009 was on file. My personal machine logs, which I had kept, on Bernard's advice from that dinner-turned-consultation years earlier, on an external drive I'd been updating ever since, showed every hour of development occurred outside business hours, on hardware that had never connected to Meridian's network. The paper trail was complete, because my father had told me to make sure it was mine before I walked through their door, and I had spent 19 years honoring that instruction even when I thought I'd never need to. Meridian had 2 options. They could fight it and lose the platform entirely, which would have meant every routing contract they held going into immediate operational crisis, or they could negotiate a licensing agreement. They chose to negotiate. I will not disclose the specific terms of the settlement. What I can say is that I no longer need to worry about the next 30 years. What I can also say is that there is a line in the agreement that I asked Bernard to fight for, specifically, one that wasn't about money at all. It was a clause requiring that any use of the Pathfinder name in Meridian's marketing materials, client presentations, or public filings include an attribution line crediting me as the original architect. They didn't want to include it. We held firm. It's in there. People ask me sometimes what the moment was. The real moment, not the legal resolution, not the settlement signing. When things shifted for me internally, they expect me to say it was when I heard Victoria's voicemail, or when Bernard told me the timeline had held up, or when the agreement was signed. It wasn't any of those. It was about 3 weeks after I was terminated on a Sunday morning. I was having coffee at the kitchen table, and I was reading back through some old notes I'd kept, a spiral notebook from 2008 where I'd first started sketching out what would become Pathfinder. The handwriting was younger somehow, more urgent. The margins were full. There were arrows connecting ideas, dead ends crossed out, better ideas written above them, and tucked between 2 pages was a napkin. An actual paper napkin, the kind from a diner, with a note my father had written me the afternoon of that conversation in the green recliner. I don't know how it ended up in that notebook. I'd carried that notebook with me through 3 apartments and 2 houses, and I hadn't seen that napkin in probably 15 years. He'd written, "The thing you make belongs to you. Remember that. Don't give it away." I sat there for a long time. I had not given it away. A few things I want to say clearly because I've thought about them. The people in Meridian's engineering team who had nothing to do with any of this, who just came in and did their work, I want to say that I was careful through the entire process to ensure the negotiated agreement included a transition period that protected their day-to-day operations. I'm not interested in burning a building down because of who struck the match. Those people had built careers there. I wasn't going to make them collateral damage in something that wasn't their fight. Victoria, I think, has moved on. I genuinely hope she figures out what she actually wants to do, separate from what her father handed her. That's a hard thing to reckon with. I don't say that with contempt. I say it as someone who watched a company nearly collapse because a person with authority made decisions without understanding what she was holding. And for anyone out there who's building something, software, a system, a process, a methodology, anything, and you are doing it on your own time, on your own equipment, before it becomes part of your job, talk to an IP attorney. Get a provisional filed. Keep your logs. Keep everything dated, not because you're planning for betrayal, not because you distrust the people you work with, because the thing you make belongs to you. My father knew that. 19 years later, a Tuesday morning, a 6:12 a.m. Zoom call from a woman who thought she was closing a chapter. She was, actually, just not the one she thought. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the legal part, not the settlement, but the deeper mechanics of how it all unfolded the way it did. Victoria didn't lose because she was cruel. She lost because she acted without understanding what she was holding. That's a different thing, and I think it matters to say it that way. Cruelty would have been simpler to process. What she did was something more ordinary and, in some ways, more dangerous. She assumed that authority meant ownership, that a title on an org chart gave her complete knowledge of what sat beneath it. She walked into a room she didn't build, turned off the lights, and didn't realize until much later that the electricity ran through someone else's wiring. The cause was there long before the consequence arrived. That's how it always works. When her father's firm acquired Meridian and handed her the wheel, nobody thought to ask a basic question. What does this company actually run on, and who actually owns it? That question wasn't asked because it felt unnecessary. They had acquired the company. Surely they had acquired everything in it. That assumption, comfortable, reasonable sounding, completely wrong, was the first domino. Every decision that followed made the fall faster. The restructuring without consultation. The terminations without knowledge transfer. The 60-day severance handed to someone whose signature sat on a licensing agreement that made the whole operation possible. Each step compounded the original error. By the time Bernard's letter landed on their general counsel's desk, it wasn't one mistake they were dealing with. It was 19 years of unchecked assumptions arriving at the same moment. I think about my father a lot when I reflect on this. He didn't leave me money. He didn't leave me connections. What he left me was a discipline, a specific, unglamorous habit of protecting what I built before anyone else could claim it. He had learned that lesson the hard way, in a green recliner, 3 years before he'd planned to retire, after a company consumed 3 decades of his work and handed him a fraction of what he'd been promised. He didn't want that for me, so he told me the truth plainly, on a napkin, in handwriting I still recognize. That's the part I keep coming back to. The intelligence it took to build Pathfinder. That mattered. The resilience it took to spend 19 years inside a company that was growing in ways I had made possible, without ever demanding recognition I wasn't given. That mattered too, but neither of those things would have been enough without the ethical clarity my father instilled in me, that the thing you make is yours and protecting it is not greed, it is integrity. You are not being difficult, you are being honest about what belongs to whom. Bernard told me once, during those 5 months of back and forth, that most people in my position never get to this outcome. Not because the law isn't on their side, but because they never kept the records, never filed the paperwork, never treated their own work as something worth defending before it needed defending. That's the only wisdom I know how to offer. Do the quiet work before the loud moment arrives. Keep your logs, know what you own, and understand that the people who will one day try to take it from you are rarely evil. They're usually just uninformed and moving fast. The Tuesday morning call at 6:12 a.m. was supposed to be an ending. Victoria meant it that way. What she didn't know, what no one had told her, because no one had thought to ask, was that she was standing in a building I had designed, flipping a switch she didn't own. The lights went out on her side of the room, not mine.